Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fusion 360 for FTC series. This is the 20th video in the series, and if you haven't watched the previous 19 videos, I recommend you do so by clicking on the card in the corner. In the last video we looked at how to use the built-in rendering software in Fusion 360 and the different settings that are available. In this video we're going to put those skills to use, and we're going to render our screw and nut model here. So I want to create a table for our nut and our screw to sit on, because I don't want them floating in the air. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to align the screw and the nut properly. Right now it's just kind of balancing on its point here. This is the top, this is the bottom. So I want to turn it on its side and make it one of these flat nut faces level with the ground. So I'm going to do a move copy like this, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees so it's sitting on its side. And then I'm going to look from here and I'm going to rotate it until it's flat. And just like that, I think that that's flat. And we can double check by doing a measure between here and the origin plane like this, and we can see that the angle is 0 degrees. So it's flat there. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to create the table for our screw and our nut to sit on. So I'm going to create a sketch on this bottom face here. I'm going to capture position, and I'm going to create a center rectangle for our table. Just like this. It's going to be a pretty small table, but a table's a lot bigger than a screw. I don't know, just something like that's fine. And then I'm going to finish the sketch, hit E for extrude, select this, and make sure to select this face, otherwise it'll leave a hole. And we're going to go ahead and bring it down 1 inch. And you can, even though this document is in millimeters, I can put in 1 inch and it'll calculate that. And we have a new body. This is our table. So now we have some issues with this that we need to sort out. First, the screw head is smaller than the size of the nut, so we need to figure out the angle where it's going to be resting. I think the screw head is heavy enough that it's going to make it so it rests at an angle. So I'm going to calculate the height difference between the two by just hiding our table and measuring from here to here. And it tells us that the distance is 0.245 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down, and we're just going to do some basic trigonometry with this. Then I need to know the distance between the faces, like this, and it says it's 6 millimeters. So I'm going to use the inverse tangent trigonometry function to calculate this. So if I do inverse tangent 0.245 divided by 6, I get an angle of 2.34 degrees. And this is going to be our angle that we need to rotate the screw. Now, if I went to try to rotate it now, you'd notice it would kind of like stop me. I can't move it, and that's because we have contact sets turned on, and this is going to stop bodies from interfering with each other. So if I go ahead and turn this off by just clicking no contact, we'll bring it back later once we have everything in position. Now it will let me move things, so they interfere. I'm going to go ahead and change this angle to our 2.34 calculated angle, just like that. Click OK, and now we have our screw is resting at the angle that we specified. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to position it so it's level with the table. Right now we can see it's sort of floating above the table. This doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit until it's not floating anymore. It really doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe something like negative 0.12 is working for me. That's pretty close. Just like that, we have our screw and our nut resting on the table realistically. Just like that is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and hop into the render workspace now. And now we can do our rendering settings. So the first thing I want to do is I want to apply some realistic materials to everything. For the screw and the nut, I'm going to use, not that, the appearance, I'm going to use a nickel satin material. That's a pretty realistic material for the coating that they put on a lot of screws and nut. It looks really close. So I'm going to use that, just drag it onto here, just like that. It's sort of like a yellowish metal. It looks great. Now for our table, I think a wood table is what we want. I feel like most workshop tables are wood. So I'm going to choose sort of like an unfinished wood. Fusion 360, it has some woods, but they're really like all super perfect. So I'm just gonna choose something that looks the best. Maybe mahogany, or maybe walnut. Yeah, I think walnut's good. I think I'm gonna go with walnut. And we can zoom in and see how that looks. Okay, so now we have our appearances set, but we can see that our wood grain is completely straight. It's completely squared away here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the texture map controls, and I'm going to select our texture, which is our wood texture here, and I'm just going to sort of maybe rotate it somewhat. I don't know. Let's see. We can just do like the thing is, like on a table, the wood grain would probably be squared away on a rectangular table like this. But when we're going to be rendering it, we're going to be zoomed in, and you're not going to really be able to see the end of the table. So I think it gives it a good effect if it's not squared away. I'm just going to do something like that, and we can just move this around until we get sort of a wood grain that appeals to you. I think I like it over here with the more darker sort of stuff. Just like that. I'm going to click OK. And now we have our wood texture completely set up. The first thing I want to do is I want to get an HDRI in here. I like that HDRI with the workshop, the machine shop HDRI. The aerodynamics workshop is really popular. A lot of people do renders in that one. That one looks wonderful. I'll leave a link in the description for HDR Haven, and you can look for some HDRIs that you like. And so I'm just going to choose this one, and it's going to load in. And in the settings, I'm going to go ahead. Right now it's just gray. We're going to put this on environment so we can see the HDRI, just like that. Let's go through the settings. The first thing I want to do is I want to change this to 16 by 9, so we know how much space we're working with, just like this. And then I'm going to position my camera, just so we can see, we can get sort of like the look we're going for. So I want it like a really low angle like this, where you can see the background really close to the screw. And again, remember that the camera doesn't have to be like exactly flat, because that's not realistic. Maybe something like this is good. And there, now we can change some things. So I want to actually save this view. So if I go back to the design workspace and I change the view, I change some stuff, I want to always come back to this view. This is going to be my render view. How do I save this view? Like in the named views section, we have the top, front, right, and home views. I want to create a new one. So I'm going to right click on named view, do new name view, and I'm just going to double click here so we can change the name to render. And this is going to be our rendered view. So if I go away and then I come back to the rendered view, it's going to be like that. Perfect. So we can look around and look at things and always come back to this view. Okay, so let's get into the settings here. The first thing I'm going to change is I'm going to change the position of the HDRI so we have the lighting how we want it. I'm just going to rotate her around, look at what's available and see which lighting I like. I want some nice reflections in the screw head, so I'm thinking, but I also don't want it to be too dark. So I'm thinking somewhere like maybe something like here would be good. It's pretty dark on this face, so maybe I want to rotate it until it's not so dark. Like there, we got some reflections. It's not too dark. That's going to be my position that I'm going to go with, 95.2 degrees. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mess around with the focal length until we get it where we want it. So if we like, we can sort of see what's good. I think I want to decrease the focal length a bit. Maybe something like 86 or 80. It's a little bit too much. Maybe 80, 88, 87. I think 87 is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And now I'm going to turn on our depth of field. And I think that the focal point here is actually the nut. I think that the nut is, the screw is kind of off to the side a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put the focal point here. And I'm going to turn down the blur, and we're going to put this at 0.05. Let's say that should be good. Now, what other settings do we want to change here? We have our depth of field, our aspect ratio, our exposure. We can change in post. So all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to mess around with the brightness a little bit and see if I want to turn it up or down. I think that it's at 1,000. It's a little bit too dark on these faces here and here. So I'm actually going to turn this up to maybe 1,200, maybe even a little higher, 1,300, and see what's too high. I think at 1,700 it's getting a little bit too high. So I'm going to go ahead and put this at 1,300, just like that, a little bit brighter. And I'm not going to put any decals in. We already did our texture map controls, so I think it's time that we are going to render our screw and our nut. It's exciting. So I'm going to use a cloud render, and this is just going to be sort of like a preliminary one and make sure everything is correct on our render. So I'm going to choose cloud render. I'm going to leave this in 1920 by 1080. If it's on custom, you can pick an image size here by choosing 1920 by 1080 or whatever you want it to be. So I'm going to hit render, and we'll be back when this is done and we'll take a look. Okay, our nut and screw has finished rendering. Let's take a look. As you can see, the depth of the blur is way too high. It's very blurry in the background like we wanted, but it's just too much. Even this screw is like very out of focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in the settings here, and I'm going to change this to maybe 0.01 and bring it down to a fifth of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a cloud render again, just like that, and we'll be back when this finishes to take a look. Okay, now our revised screw and nut has finished rendering. Let's take a look. And this is with the blur dropped to 0.01, and we can see this is much better. We probably could have gone a little bit more than 0.01, but I'm going to leave it at this. Our screw is in focus, our nut is in focus, and we've got like a blurred out background. And what helps is that I only am using a 4K background, and since that's because I use the blur on everything, so it's just going to be blurred out, and we don't need high quality. So that's looking great. The wood's looking pretty good. I'm liking this material on the screw and the nut. I'm going to call that finished. Hopefully you have something that looks just as good as this, if not better. There's many ways to improve upon this. We could have done a lot of cool things, like we could have added an Allen key and then a nut driver in the background as if we just put this together just for a little bit more realism. But I'm going to do this for now. Hopefully you learned something in this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next video where we are going to be taking a look at creating a blueprint for this screw and nut.